I think the biggest benefit of our stains is the fact that the workability of it. They self-dissolve and reactivate. And what I mean by that is when we teach at schools, it's not unusual for us to take the lid from a stain can and put it face down and leave a nice ring on the floor and leave that for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. I've even done it up to 2 hours. The contractors they're freaking out, like, what are you going to do about that? And we just leave it sitting there. But the fact that our stains redissolve and reincorporate back in another, it really minimizes the lap lines and marks. If a guy dribbles a little bit of stain on the floor, putting fresh stain on top of it will reactivate it and blend it in.
Hi guys, welcome to Pro Shop Talk here at the Master's Craft. I'm Daniel, I'm the technical director here, and this is a series where we get to talk with some of our vendor partners about the products and processes that they have for wood flooring professionals and contractors. So today we get to talk with Bryan Rathbun. He is a territory manager for Bona, and good to have him on the line. So Bryan, welcome, and how are you doing?
Good. How's everybody doing out there?
Good, good. Well, hopefully good. So tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your history.
Again, thanks for the introduction, Daniel. I'm Bryan Rathbun, territory manager for the Rocky Mountains, which I have here in the background, or maybe those are Rockies. I'm not quite sure where that's from. I've been in the industry for 28 years. Started in my career in Germany, in the German apprentice program. Then came back here to the States and had ran my own company from 1997 until 2015. Started Bona in February of 2015 and been with them ever since. I'm an NWFA certified installer, sand and finisher, CEU presenter, and also an NWFA inspector, although I don't inspect currently right now because of conflicts of interest. But I have an extreme passion for this industry, that is for sure.
Awesome, good deal. I know you've got a ton of experience with wood floors, and so hopefully you can help illuminate some things for guys today. So I think today what we're going to talk about is your Bona Drifast stain system, and
Yes.
talk about some of the features of that and kind of how guys use it and things like that. So why don't you just go ahead and give us a quick introduction to your guys' stain? What kind of a stain is it, and what are some features of that?
So we have 26 colors in our stain lineup. It is an oil modified product. The nice thing about our stains is that they penetrate, they stain and seal the wood floor. So our stains are designed to be applied, and then afterwards the contractor can coat it with 2 coats of finish. There's no sealer required. I think the biggest benefit of our stains is the fact that the workability of it. They self-dissolve and reactivate. And what I mean by that is when we teach at schools, it's not unusual for us to take the lid from a stain can and put it face down and leave a nice ring on the floor and leave that for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. I've even done it up to 2 hours. The contractors they're freaking out, like, what are you going to do about that? And we just leave it sitting there. But the fact that our stains redissolve and reincorporate back in another, it really minimizes the lap lines and marks. If a guy dribbles a little bit of stain on the floor, putting fresh stain on top of it will reactivate it and blend it in.
Awesome. Good deal. So let's talk a little bit about how guys prepare for your stain. So like, what is the typical guy going to do to get ready for staining? What's the sanding sequence he's going to end on? How's he going to clean and get ready for it? Kind of what leads up to that staining process?
Yeah, so we do have published sanding grit guidelines. We're certainly not in the business of trying to tell guys that this is the only way to sand a floor. We just have what we call our recommended best practices. So a typical sanding sequence would be either doing a rough cut in a 50 or 60 grit, intermediate cut with 80 grit, and then finishing off the floor with 100 or 120 grit. The key components to sanding floors, though, is that we don't want guys to skip a grit. So if he starts at 40, his next grit would be either a 60 or an 80. We just don't want a guy going from a 40 grit rough cut and going all the way to like 100 grit. well, actually a 40 to an 80 would be skipping 50 and 60. So 40 cut would be followed by a 60 grit. You know, we're really creating a surface profile. So our stains can then, you know, penetrate and seal that wood. That grit sequence step, if their guys are skipping it, that's where they can get into problems with seeing the little lines and heavy marks that fine sandpaper is not going to remove.
Sure. So then you said they're in about 100, 120 grit, somewhere in there, probably 120 for darker colors, 100 for a little bit lighter colors. So,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So guy sands it, gets done with his final sanding, and then just vacuums, tacks off, dry tacks, and then they're ready to stain.
Yeah, vacuum, tack it. I'm a big fan of our Tampico head, which is actually probably an underutilized tool. It's a soft horsehair bristle brush. It's a 16-inch brush that goes on a buffer. So we're not asking a guy to do an extra step. We're just replacing it. So you vacuum the edges, and then you have your Tampico head on your buffer. Obviously, you've got to be hooked up to dust containment, which we're big fans of having dust containment. But that soft bristle brush will break loose that soft powder from the sanding process, get it airborne, and then the vacuum system can pick it up. And so a typical sequence would be, say you guys doing 1,000 square feet, he Tampico heads the entire floor. He's already got a buffer in there anyways. And then vacuum the edges and a dry tack, and they're ready to apply stain. The nice thing about that Tampico head too, Daniel, is that the contractor's now, he's just staining wood floors, not wood floors plus dust. So he gets a better effect from the stain.
And I would assume if you're going to use like a Tampico brush, you do that before you water pop. So you'd brush off and then you'd water pop, and then you'd be ready to stain. But with your stains, you don't have to water pop, certainly optional. But I'm assuming that it, in addition to making the color absorb a little bit more and getting it a little bit darker, it probably also helps even out the floor, even out the color as well, take any errors in sanding out of the floor. Yeah,
it's, you know, the water popping, because the guy had to sand the floor, you know, like especially a darker stain up to that 120 grit, it really closes down the wood tissue.
Yeah.
So if they want that dark, rich color, water popping is a good way to do that. Plus, it doubles the color palette. All of our stains can be mixed with one another. You can do 2 parts of one stain to 1 part another, or whatever. I mean, the limitation of the stain blends is really just between your ears. I caution guys, though, to don't use water popping to fix improper sanding. The water popping is to work on hard or wild grain species and to give a more uniform appearance. But I don't want guys using water popping to hide improper sanding process.
Sure. Okay. So now we've gotten up to the actual application. How would you recommend applying the stain? And in addition to that, like, what are all the different ways that a guy could apply the stain? I know a lot of contractors have a lot of different methods. There's pad on, pad off, there's rag on, rag off, there's brush on, rag off, I've even seen roll on, rag off. So what would you guys recommend? And are there any ways that you would tell guys, hey, don't apply our stain this way, or we don't recommend? So
again, all those methods that you just mentioned are approved methods. I'm a huge fan of buffing stain on and off with carpet cut into 16-inch circles to go on the buffer. The nice thing about that is that, one, your coverage rate doubles. You know, our published coverage rate is 800 to 1,000 square feet per gallon. If a guy's not water popping just a sanded floor to 100 grit or 120 grit, say he's using a neutral or light colored stain, he's going to get about double our published coverage rate buffing it on and off. It's the easiest way. It's the most efficient. So contractor, a 1 or 2 man crew, 1,000 square feet, buffing the stain on with carpet can usually accomplish that in about 45 minutes to an hour. Contractors no longer having to crawl around on their hands and knees, rag on and rag off. The pitfalls of rag on, rag off, one is that it's time consuming, it's labor intensive. If it's a big floor, 2,500, 3,000 square feet, that lasts 750 to 500 square feet, they're getting tired, they're sweaty, they may not be ragging that stain off as effectively as they did in the beginning. So that leaves a film, that film can lead to some adhesion issues. So the buffing on is just a better practice. And we get guys off their knees and make them more efficient on their process. Rag on, rag off. A lot of guys still do it out there, Daniel. It's not a problem. The thing I would caution about that is that if they're taking their stain rag and putting it in a can, we want them to kind of squeeze that rag out so they're not just putting a massive amount of stain in one spot and then smearing it, because that one area where that rag first touches the floor, it really floods that floor with stain, and then they work it down to where it runs out and then they repeat. So they may have the overall effect will be the same, but that stain down below has flooded that floor. It's going to take a lot longer to dry in that area.
Gotcha. So maybe risk of bleed back or something like that, or white lines or those kind of things.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So what, talk about carpet pads on a buffer. What does that process typically look like for a guy who's doing it? So you cut out that 16-inch pad. I know we even sell those now. We've got pre-stamped 16-inch pads that most guys are using. So guy's going to have a 16-inch pad, and what's that process going to look like in terms of applying the actual stain?
So just for clarification, I do the same thing. I always say carpet pad, but we're actually talking about actual carpet, not the carpet padding that goes underneath. So I don't want people to get confused. I do the same thing. I say, use a carpet pad. And they're like the foam stuff? I'm like, no, actual carpet. So carpet circles, 16-inch circles, for argument's sake, we're going to call it it's a carpet pad, but it's really actual carpet. So you have two of them. Say we're doing 500 square feet.
Yep.
Your first one is what I call your on pad, and you flip that over. They're going to pour a 4 to 6 inch pancake of stain in the center. Flip it back over, set the buffer on it, and start buffing the field. So that's your on pad. And then it's up to the contractor whether they want to rag on, rag off before or after. I'm a bigger fan of, if they're doing a 3 to 4 foot wide area, go ahead and buff on your stain in the field, and then your guy's going to cruise around, rag on, rag off the edges. He's only got about 2 to 3 inches to rag on, rag off. And then your other carpet circle is the one you buff off all the excess, and you just keep repeating that process. Depending on the stain color, those two carpet circles will cover 500 to 750 square feet before the on circle or pad becomes oversaturated. And you can tell when that starts to occur because that'll start spitting out stain on the edges. And so you put that to the side, dispose of it correctly. Your off pad now becomes your new on pad, and then you get another carpet circle to be your off pad, and you just keep repeating that process.
Gotcha.
That's how it works. Again, generally, your typical floor in that 750 to 1,500 square foot range, about 3 carpet circles, about 4 or 5 rags, and that's all you're going to need to put all that stain on versus half a box of rags or whatever.
Right. Okay. And how's a guy going to tell when he needs to reload that carpet pad with more stain? Is it just a little bit thinner, not as much color going down on the floor? Just kind of eyeball it. Okay.
Yeah, you just eyeball it. You'll see it actually just die right out, and they just park that to the side and reload it. Yep.
Okay. And then what's the typical dry time for your stain? What kind of conditions are you looking for, and then about how much dry time?
Well, our environmental conditions are published on the cans. Your typical home environment of that, 30 to 50% relative humidity. Although here in Colorado, we rarely ever achieve that, but our stains work just fine here. And in that temperature range of, 65 to 70 degrees or, 75 degrees. Again, we're going to caution against having extreme temperatures or sunlight beating on the floor, try and diffuse that heat. Typical dry time for most of our stains is 2 to 3 hours, so they dry very quickly. Our white stain is a 6-hour dry time. And then some of our heavier pigmented stains like our cocoa, bark, and even our ebony is a 12 to 18-hour dry time. One cautionary thing is if a contractor is mixing, let's say, white stain with neutral. Well, neutral is a 2 to 3 hour dry time, but if he's got any white mixed in with that neutral, you're always going to default to the longer dry time. So if there's white in there or cocoa or bark, you're going to obey the longer dry time, not that 2 to 3 hours if they're mixing colors.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about error correction. You know, sometimes guys will come back the next day and they'll see little spots on the floor, or there may be a heavy spot or something like that. You know, they got to do a little bit of touch up before they start coating. So what are some tips and techniques you can give for a guy if he needs to touch up your stain?
I'm a pretty cautious guy by nature, so I like to approach things in baby steps. Don't break out the edger because you got a boot print in the floor. You know, a lot of times the stains, because they do reactivate, you just get a little cut piece of maroon pad, get your stain all mixed up, dip your maroon pad in there and just do a wet buff on there with that maroon pad and see if you can reactivate everything and blend it in. We will have a link to our e-learning series on doing touch-ups. A lot of YouTube videos out there that Bona's produced showing a dark stain or a dark blemish or too light of an area and the tips and tricks to fix that up. But start out easy with just a maroon pad and do a wet buff on there and see if that takes care of it. If it doesn't, then you could break out some sandpaper or scraper and do that little touch up and get it to blend in there.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, are there any types of finish that you would not recommend putting over this? I know most guys are going to go with the urethane finish. They're going to put an oil poly. They're going to put a water poly over the top. Is there anything you would tell guys to avoid putting over the top?
Yeah, I'm just going to promote the Bona system, that if you're using a Bona stain, that any of our finishes will work with our stains. So, you know, there's guys out there that are still using shellacs and acid cure finishes and stuff. We're not testing for compatibility, so stick with the Bona system that all of our finishes and sealers are compatible with our stains.
Gotcha. Okay. Actually, I've got a real quick question. With the reactivation, is there any way to layer your stains or ceruse with the stains at all, or would that just be an entirely different process?
That would be an entirely different process. If you want to get that cerusing or two-tone effect, then I would recommend our craft oils.
Okay.
But our stains it's a one-coat application. So, you know, if the contractor puts down special wool and that homeowner comes home after work and they look at the floor and they're like, yeah, we signed off on that. We like that stain, but now it's just a little too light. We want it darker. We don't want contractors to put in another coat of stain on there to get it darker. You will run into adhesion issues, or you could run into adhesion issues. So if it's too light, the overall floor, you've got to just sand it down and do something else, either a different color stain or water pop it in that case. But the stains, to reblend them, we're talking about taking care of a little spot. That's okay to do that wet buffing and fix that repair that you need to fix. Yes, you're putting stain on stain, but you're also limiting it to a smaller area and taking off all the excess. When I'm talking about stain on stain is an entire floor. We don't want that to happen.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. Well, is there anything that a guy needs to do after he's put the stain on and let it dry before he starts coating, besides vacuuming and tacking and making sure the floor is clean?
Yeah, just do a dry tack. We have a 48-hour window that a contractor could put our stain down. He's got 48 hours before he would have to do anything outside of a vacuum and tack to put a stain or put a sealer or a finish on the floor. If you do go over 48 hours, we want that stain to be lightly abraded. The best method to do that is get one of our maroon pads on a mop pole and a lot of guys will just cut that maroon pad to fit the rectangular mop head, and then just very lightly abrade the floor with the direction of the wood grain to open up the bonding sites, the hydrogen bonding sites, and get that stain opened back up so that the finish will stick. Some guys will use a buffer and a maroon pad. That's a little bit risky because you could bust through that stain because of the weight and rotation of the buffer. So the best thing if it's been over 48 hours, is a maroon pad on a mop pole and lightly abrade it to open it back up, and then you can put a sealer or finish on there.
Okay, awesome. Well, guess the other question I'd have that I'd like to ask with products is, if a guy is going to mess this product up, and believe me, guys will find unique and interesting ways to do that with just about anything, myself included. What are the easiest pitfalls to avoid with your stain?
The easiest pitfalls is basically it comes down to the sanding process. Skipping too many grits, going from a 40 to a 100 grit, and then the halos around the walls. For guys using a 100 grit screen, for example, but he wants to use an orbital to do the edges, and he uses 100 grit sandpaper on the orbital. Well, screen and sandpaper are impacting that wood surface differently, so you could get a halo effect. I think that's probably the number one thing that I see is blending the field to the edges. So if a contractor's screens and older technology, I'm a bigger fan of using our multi-head or double-sided disc. The nice advantage of that is our multi-head, you could have 100 or 120 grit black paper on that multi-head. It's pre-punched with 8 holes, so it'll fit on an orbital. And so now you're using 100 or 120 grit black on the multi-head and on the orbital. So now you're using same grit, same color paper to blend everything together. I think that's probably the number one error that I see out there, Daniel.
Gotcha. Awesome. Tell us a little bit about some of the videos and learning resources that you put together for contractors. I know you guys do a good job of that, and it's good information for contractors and guys out there who want to get a little bit more in depth with your products and your systems.
Yeah, we just did a new YouTube video. It's actually about 1 hour and 6 minutes long, so it's a lengthy video, but it's a very in-depth video. We're showing different techniques, the buffing on and off with the carpet circles, using a cut pad to cut along the edges and then ragging off the excess. But that's a very in-depth video on our stains. We did a mock-up in our studio with 2x4s to replicate rooms and hallways. So it's a good representation of what contractors would run into in a typical scenario. That YouTube video is available on Instagram, Bona_Pro. You can find that. I'm sure you guys will upload that link as well. And then if contractors ever want any more information or YouTube videos, they can, direct message me or their local territory manager, and we can share all these videos. We also have our e-learning platform, which each territory manager has the passcodes and login information. So again, contractors can reach out to their local territory manager and get set up with our e-learning process, not only to go over stains, but the entire Bona lineup from adhesives to floor care to finish and sealers.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, thanks for joining us. Thanks for all the info on your stain, and appreciate everything, man.
I appreciate the time, guys. Best of luck out there. And if you have any questions or need further information, you can reach out to me or your local territory manager at Bona. Appreciate it.